So the Matlala Commission heard from Ekurhuleni Police Chief Isaac Mapiyeye. Now, I'm going to fill you in. Ekurhuleni is like central to all of the graft that we are hearing from out of these various commissions. It seems to be like the dirtiest city in South Africa. And it's quite strategic. For those that don't know, Ekurhuleni is what we used to call the East Rand in Gauteng. So it's the eastern part of Gauteng. It's very accessible to KZN. And of course, it's got the biggest airport in the country right there. It's quite close to the city of Tshwane. There's a lot that surrounds it. It's sort of a centrally good place to be because a lot of factories, a lot of industrial areas, and when South Africa, some of the structures were changed, a couple of metros were sort of self-evident, the city of Johannesburg, the city of Pretoria, later Tshwane, and this piece was carved out of the East Rand and made the city of Ekurhuleni. And it has been crime central ever since. Back in the previous time when we had crime problems, it was centered around, when we used to have Radovan Krejcir and thugs like that, they were centered around the suburb of Bedfordview in the city of Ekurhuleni. Now that just seems to have grown, and wow, what a place. So this guy's the police chief, Isaac Mapiyeye, and he explained, and I love this, this is a South African special, everything is somebody else's fault. And often it's somebody junior to this person. We heard it from Fani Masemola, where he said, no, the problem's always this guy below me and that guy below me. You're the boss, for God's sakes. Anyway, the person he's trying to throw under the bus seems to be an absolute beauty, by the name of Julius Mkhwanazi. Now, I'm not making up that name. His name is in actual fact Julius Mkhwanazi, and he seems to be even chummier with the criminal syndicates than even Shadrach Sabia. He's got links with Matlala. He was doing everything to assist crime in Ekurhuleni. And of course, remember, that's where the Tembisa Hospital is. It's just a great place to operate. And you couldn't operate unless it sure helps to have the complicity of the Ekurhuleni Metro Police. They made life very, very simple for the criminal syndicates. This guy, Julius Mkhwanazi, when the police chief was away, he would make appointments. Now, the police chief is telling the Matlala Commission that this is a terrible thing, that this guy would behave badly when I was away. Well, then why didn't you hold him to take him to task, hold him to account, reverse these appointments? But apparently that's asking too much. This Julius Mkhwanazi, one will remember, was the same person that fitted Matlala's own vehicles with blue lights, his own personal vehicles. On top of it, Matlala's company, Cat Security, was undertaking policing work, arresting citizens. Just think about this for a minute. One of the top criminals in the country was doing policing work through his own security company and the Ekurhuleni Metro Police. It is unbelievable, but we've got to remember that this doesn't happen without political complicity. And Ekurhuleni has been run by various coalitions, and the current coalition that's been in place for about 2 years or so, 2 or 3 years, is a coalition between the ANC and the EFF that always says that they're against corruption. But yet they are in charge in Ekurhuleni. The ANC are only in power in Ekurhuleni with the help of the EFF. And the EFF has some key positions in the Ekurhuleni police. So one must remember that the criminals are backed by leadership that look the other way, if not help quite constructively. So that's the problem that we have in Ekurhuleni, and that's what the Matlala Commission had to hear, how this police chief made out like it was everybody else's fault. Now remember, just as an aside, one of the big talking points is whether policing, because there's going to be an overhaul of policing, right? Not hopefully, it's got to happen. It will happen. The question is whether it'll be effective or not. One of the big suggestions is that policing gets decentralized. Well, if Ekurhuleni is anything to go by, the idea of decentralizing policing is even worse than the mess we've got now. Because you've got little kingdoms, little havens for bandits like this one run by the ANC and the EFF, where anyone's allowed to do anything and the Ekurhuleni Metro Police make it happen. So this is a real problem, and that's what the Matlala Commission had to hear about in their last sitting last week. But there was probably a little bit more firepower going on in the parliamentary committee meeting, where the person in the hot seat was Andrea Johnson. Now, those that don't know, Andrea Johnson has got quite a reputation as being a fearless crime fighter. She was initially going to be the person that was going to do all the prosecutions with Shamila Batoy, but she learned out of sheer frustration that Shamila Batoy was going to do nothing, so Andrea Johnson resigned. And a special organization was set up called IDAC, right? This was an inspectorate that acts against corruption, right? They are there as corruption busters. She has been quite energetic, but boy, that energy seems to be in some fairly crazy places. She was the person behind the suspension of Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo. He was the guy who was instrumental in getting a lot of the evidence that led to the arrests of Kat Matlala and Katiso Molefe. But IDAC decided, despite 5 volumes of corruption in the Zondo Commission, that the first person you have to act against is the general who is investigating the criminal syndicates, and they got him suspended. The guy seemed to do some really dodgy stuff in appointing some junior to a senior position. That was his crime. And we're not going to go through levels of crime. I'm not going to say that it should have been overlooked. But there is no doubt that you want to say, of all the places to start, somebody who has badly, let's assume he did as he has been accused of, some very bad HR practices and nepotism perhaps. Maybe one should look at the people that are killing other people, maybe the people that are blowing up whistleblowers in their driveways rather than the person who's appointing somebody else. I'm just talking about it as a starting point. But anyway, Andrea Johnston seems to be the person who is going to do some action, even if it seems like perhaps it was led by other people, right? So she has been the person that was that's heading up IDAC. And IDAC initially was put in the category of somebody that was trying to thwart the arrest of these criminals by suspending this particular police general. But it seems like perhaps her excuse is plausible. She was just going after this first. That's just the way it happened. Who knows? But there was a lot of discussion about somebody else, and that is Fidelity Adams. Fidelity Adams was mentioned by Mkhwanazi, and quite clearly there's a beef between Mkhwanazi and Fidelity Adams. Now, Fidelity Adams heads up a political party called the National Coloured Congress. And he was mentioned by Mkhwanazi, along with the Democratic Alliance's Diane Kohler-Barnard, of releasing information that they had no right to release. This was top secret information. And it was not meant to be for public consumption, and apparently they both released it. We don't really know what the accusations are. It seems like in Diane Kohler-Barnard's case, some information was fed in a media release. But with Fidelity Adams, it seems like this guy hangs out with some very dodgy people. And there's question marks, and he accused the police of losing dockets, and he just seems to be a person that needs to be put in the hot seat, and we need some answers from him. It's a very interesting, very colorful character that keeps a very, very interesting company. But there is no doubt that we are going to have to hear a lot more from Fidelity Adams, because he seems to be a person that kept, that same sort of strange company that we've seen a lot of our politicians keep. And there is no doubt that he is a fierce disliker of the Political Killings Task Team, which at the moment rings a bell for all of us because the Political Killings Task Team is the only organization that seems to care about putting bad people behind bars. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, right? But IDAC is starting to gain momentum. Yes, they've done nothing yet about the fight, just as we were about to accuse them of doing absolutely nothing about the Zondo Commission. They announced that they've issued charges against the convicted liar, Malusi Gigaba. Why I say he's a convicted liar, the guy was caught lying under oath. Now, Malusi Gigaba, for those that forget, was at one stage the head of the ANC Youth League. He was being touted as a future president. He was as smooth as silk, and the guy was given a cabinet position from ages ago, and he was a firm favorite of Thabo Mbeki and was one of those that switched sides to supporting Jacob Zuma. And he found a home in Saxonwold, a favorite of the Guptas, and he did all of their bidding, and the evidence brought against him in the Zondo Commission was overwhelming that this guy was on the take. And now that there is, now IDAC have actually said that they have pressed charges against him, which is really the first significant action of the Zondo Commission. Before we go too hard against the law, various law authorities and these various police groupings, let's understand that Malusi Gigaba, his past, we've known that he's a crook for 5 years, for longer, 10 years. But yet the ANC still puts him in parliament. He's currently a member of parliament. You're meant to be beyond reproach when you're in parliament. But remember, we've got Malusi Gigaba in parliament. We've got Gwedi Mantashe, who's got a case to answer in parliament. We've got half of MK and, Brian Molefe, Siyabonga Gama, Lucky Montana. It seems to be that parliament is not necessarily for honorable people, and we should always remember that parliament is quite a good place to hide if you've got problems, but it seems like Malusi Gigaba is going to have to go and answer questions. He is the one person that not only was a convicted, caught-out liar under oath, he was also caught out doing other things in front of the camera, which are quite embarrassing. So we're just talking about the measure of the man. Clearly not an honorable chap, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens to him. There's no doubt that what's starting to happen in these various commissions is that there's pressure building. We can have these bit part players. We can have the head of police in Ekurhuleni answering why they helped criminals, not citizens. We can have this witness and that witness. But when are we going to get to the real people that we need to hear from on the political side? When are we going to hear what the president knew? The president gets an intelligence briefing all the time. He must have known. Whereas the Minister of Intelligence, Kubutso Ntshavheni, she's got some cases to answer as well, with work that she did before she got to parliament. There's also question marks about her honesty. When are those people going to be put on stand? And most importantly, when are we going to have Kat Matlala, Katiso Molefe, and remember this name, Hangwane Morgan Maumela, the president's one-time nephew, who, you don't just get 5 Lamborghinis because unless you invent something wonderful that the whole world wants. All he did was sign contracts with hospitals and enough money to get 5 Lamborghinis. Maybe there was more than one hospital involved, and yet nothing. All we're hearing about is internal ructions within police force and some bit part players, politicians and the like. But we need to get the right people to start talking. And there's going to be one of those people that's going to be incentivized to tell the truth and for a reduced sentence, so that politicians, as well as the criminals, can go to jail. That would be first prize. A couple of weeks ago, we did a piece about the corruption at the PIC. This is the Public Investment Corporation. They handle basically all the country's assets and invest it. They deal in billions, if not trillions of rands of South Africa's money that they meant to deal with wisely. Well, this is a nice way for people to deal nicely with our money. There was a person who had some serious findings against him, and that was a previous chief operating officer, Vuyani Hako, and he was suspended, what a surprise, and finally incentivized to leave. Basically, it's a nice way to say that they wanted to fire him without firing him, so they say, if you resign, we'll give you some money. So the guy left. The PIC paid him of our money. This is South Africa's money. Paid him 10.8 million rand to leave. 10.8 million rand to leave. This is after there were findings against him, which one presumes means cost us more money. They pay the guy 10.8 million rand to leave, and then mysteriously another 4.5 million rand finds its way into his bank account. When are we going to hold the PIC to account? This falls under the ambit of the Treasury Ministry. Now we know that the Treasury Ministry is headed up by Enoch Godongwana. And if people go look at his CV, there's like a 7-8 year gap. Because when he was in the Eastern Cape legislature, he had misused funds. As our Minister of Treasury I'm talking about. Suddenly he's misused funds in the Eastern Cape. This is the ANC. You get removed from that position, and then one day you get promoted to Minister of Finance. So anyway, it's up to him to do something about it. Now, while we speak about the Minister of Finance, 1 out of 470 companies that have had findings against them, right, for tender fraud and things like that. Only one company has been blacklisted, because the Treasury are not doing their job. Now, these are the custodians of our money. These are the people we're meant to trust with the country's future. When are they going to be held to account? This is the same minister, remember, whose idea instead of cutting expenditure, his idea was to add 2% onto our VAT bill, to increase the VAT from 15 to 17%. That was his idea at the start of the year, rather than cut this kind of cost that we deal with every day on this show. So I think there's big questions that have to be asked about that particular minister. How much longer can we put up with him? But it seems like we're in love with men that wear hats. My Lord, at some point we've got to rather put competent people in those positions. But this Minister of Finance is costing us money. And then lastly, we have to talk about our president. Gets asked a straightforward question and comes up with word salad once again. But hey, for once, I'm only complaining, but in small letters, because there's a big cleanup in Johannesburg. Also happens to be a couple of weeks ahead of the G20 summit that the US aren't attending. So what's the government doing? Well, we are cleaning up. And as the president says, you always clean up when visitors come. Well, apparently, Joburg citizens and voters, please remember, voters, you don't care, but the visitors care to this government. He uses the example of 2010, how we got everything working. Why? Because there were visitors. And now we're going to do it again because there's visitors. Really, why doesn't the president just say, I don't care about citizens, I only care about foreign visitors and my mates in the G20? That's the way Cyril Ramaphosa runs his country. You get what you pay for, and that's why he lost 17% of the national vote in the last election. Good luck with this policy. It's not going to last. Citizens have had it right up to my bald head. So thank you so much for joining us on The Political Insider. Subscribe to the channel. We'll keep you updated with the news. Thanks for joining me.